Many of us are taught that if something comes easily to us, it can't possibly be important, that real contribution must involve sacrifice. And yet, again and again, people tell me that the moments they feel most alive, most useful, most connected, are the very moments they seemed to involve little effort, let alone sacrifice. On today's show, we'll be talking about the easier, more natural ways to learn. We'll be talking with Coral Conant Gilles. Now, most likely you have never heard of her, but after today, you will never forget her. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Madelyn Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show about opening possibilities, especially when life doesn't unfold the way you expect. Here we explore how people come to understand who they are, how they choose their next step, and how they learn to trust themselves when the path forward doesn't look conventional. My guest today works in a space often dismissed as informal, playful, or nice to have. Yet what she actually is doing aligns with a profound shift in how we understand learning, meaning, and human development. This episode is not about teaching or learning in the abstract. It is about what becomes possible, especially for young people, when learning is relational, it's embodied, and it's alive. If these words don't make sense when you think of learning, think of a carpenter. He or she begins as an apprentice. They're paired with a master carpenter, if they're lucky, and they build a real relationship with that master. And as they build a relationship with the building itself. And as they learn the craft of carpentry, they may be able then to see what it means to use those skills to create a home for someone. As they learn more and more, they don't just learn how to be a carpenter, they actually become a carpenter. That's human development. And what it asks of us as adults is to trust forms of knowledge that cannot be reduced, standardized, or easily measured. My guest today is Coral Conant Gilles, a storytelling naturalist whose work brings together storytelling, nature connection, imagination, and play. Coral didn't set out to become a storyteller. She arrived there gradually through environmental education, through working with children, and through paying attention to what consistently brought people to life. Today, she creates experiences that invite curiosity, empathy, and connection with ourselves and with one another, and with the natural world. I'm going to bring her in. Carl, good morning, and welcome to Unlocked.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. You've captured so much of what's important to me.
Oh, good. Well, I have more to say because I want to tell people how I found you and what drew me to what you do. Because it's not what you do, it's how you do it. I mean, I watched you we literally were in a class together, in a working session in a small group. And what I saw was that you bring presence, you bring relationship, you bring deep attentiveness to what's unfolding when people feel safe to imagine. So to me, that's gold, just gold. So, all right, I'm really glad you're here.
I feel so honored by your words.
Oh, they're all I can say is they're from the heart. All right. Well, I think we should begin. Help this audience understand, what you do and how you got here, because just to give it a context.
Well, as you said, I'm a storyteller and a naturalist, and my goals are to inspire curiosity and empathy and connection with ourselves, each other, and the natural world. I do that through storytelling in the traditional oral sense. What that means is that I'm not going into spaces with books. I use books all the time, but I use them in my home and in my office. And when I get to other people, my stories are in my heart and in my mind, and I tell them with my body and my voice. I also do nature connection work. So that's wrapped into the storytelling. Almost all of my stories have some kind of nature connection, and I often pair those stories with a hands-on activity. For instance, I visited a preschool earlier this year, and I brought my tracking activity. So I told stories full of animal movement, and then I pulled out this big mat, this big canvas sheet that I had used real track replicas and paint and created a story in tracks on this big mat. And then oh yeah.
Coral, I want you to make sure the audience understands what a track is. Now,
Oh,
I do because I live in the country, but
yes, the tracks are animal footprints. And these track replicas are so cool because someone, not me, I'm not that cool yet. Someone went out into the world and made a cast of real tracks, like really good tracks left in the mud or the sand or the snow, and then used those to create a cast so you could stamp with those. But they're not flat stamps. So I take these tracks and we sit around this mat, and I ask the audience, in this case preschoolers, what do they see? And they start naming animals, and some of them are very different than what I was actually using, but that's okay. I want their curiosity and imagination. I don't need them to be accurate. And then I started asking, okay, well, what is that goose doing? What is that dog doing? And they build the story that they see in those tracks. And then they get those same track replicas and paint and paper, and they create stories with the tracks and then share them with me and with each other. So that way I'm building that deeper connection, whether that's classroom or community or library. And as you said, Madelyn, relationship is so important to me. So some of my work is these often one-time programs where I'm not going to see that group of kids again. Or if I'm lucky, it's a school that asks me to come back every year or twice a year. And so I start to see some of them a few times, and they remember me and my stories. But I'm not getting those deep relationships. So the other aspect of my work is that I work in a fully outdoor program where I see the same kids every single week for 4 or 5 hours. And we spend our time in nature, in connection with each other, exploring the landscape, and of course, telling stories.
you've used storytelling as you've described what you do. How did you stumble upon that? I mean, that's not necessarily the automatic thing. Oftentimes, teachers will say, "Well, now see, this is a ghost track, and this is notice how the Eagles one has a claw in the back." I mean,
Yep.
didactic, it's called.
Yes. And it was stumbling. I did stumble upon it. So I was in a position as an environmental educator doing very didactic work, like you're talking about. I was working at an environmental education center in the Pacific Northwest. We got to see every single fifth grader in one local district and every single fourth grader in the other local district. And we taught them the same 5 topics. So there were other things coming in, right? But multiple times a week, I taught those same 5 topics over and over and over. And one of them is what's called the Missoula Floods. You're probably not familiar with the Missoula Floods.
Nope.
Most of your audience probably is not either. But the Missoula Floods are so cool. These are floods that happened 10 to 15,000 years ago, up to 100 times, and literally shaped the landscape of Montana, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon.
Wow.
If you are in an airplane above those states, you can see it looks like ripples on the edge of a lake, except they're huge hills, right? Because you're up in an airplane. And those ripples really, truly are ripples on the edge of an ancient, enormous lake. And this lake broke, the dam broke and flooded repeatedly. So this is what I'm trying to teach to these kids, but I'm telling them things like 500 cubic miles of water. Right? I can say it so enthusiastically, but it's still so incomprehensible. How does a 10-year-old wrap their mind around what that number means? I can't wrap my mind around that number. So I had been inspired by a local storyteller, and off the cuff, unprepared, one day I said, okay, close your eyes. They closed their eyes, and I took them back to the Ice Age. We sat for hundreds of years as we watched this glacier come down and block the creek in front of us. And we built a fire because we were cold. And we watched as that creek flooded now that there was a dam, that glacier dam blocking the creek. And it flooded so much that now we had to build a magical raft, and we sat on our magical raft for a few hundred more years. And we could hear the creaking of that glacier, that ice dam, and we could hear it cracking. We started to see huge chunks falling off of it. And suddenly that dam broke. And we rode those floods across those states. And we traveled through the Columbia Gorge where they had been. So your audience might not all be able to picture that Columbia Gorge, but these kids could. And so as I described the layers of basalt, of rock that were 80 feet tall, stacked on top of each other, ripping off like sheets of paper, they had that image in their mind. And these layers of rock were crashing around us as we flew down this river. And when I got to the Pacific Ocean, when we finally made it to the end of our flood, they all had their eyes open. Kids are magic like that. They know exactly when it's time to open their eyes. Adults just keep their eyes closed the whole time. They had their eyes open. Their eyes were wide. They were engaged. They understood what had happened. They were impressed. They were curious, and they wanted to know more. That was the first time I felt like I had communicated that information in a way that they could comprehend, and it stuck. I wanted more of that.
Oh, I can so appreciate that. As you know, I've been involved in storytelling for a long time, and I can still remember the first time I finally put two and two together. When you're listening to a story, you are engaged completely as a person. And I could just imagine those kids. I mean, as you were telling a story just now, I literally had shivers in my body because it's like, wow, God, because I imagined the gorge, and it's so deep and so narrow, and I could think I'm going to bump myself on either side. It's so close. Oh gosh. Okay, I'll stop.
I love it. I love to hear your reflections. I love it when the audience is able to give those pieces back to me. And one of the pieces I love about storytelling, you'll have to tell me if this is true for you too, is that we all hear different things in those stories. And each audience member is taking away a piece that's important to them. And their mind has brought in their own experiences and their own knowledge and their own questions and mixed it with the story and come out with this sticking piece that is different from what's sticking to the person next to them. And so I love to hear your reflection.
Well, one of the things you learn very early on, if you decide you want to become a storyteller in a more classical sense, is they to keep hammering at you. Your story is no longer your story once you've told it. It only lives in the minds of your listeners, and it becomes their story. Because you're right, that their story then relates to what they know and what they've experienced. Yeah, it's not yours anymore. Well, you still have it, but their story is now their story.
You might know this. There's a psychology term, I guess, a neuroscience term that connects to exactly that. when we tell a story, your brain engages in neural coupling. So if you're listening to a story, your brain is doing neural coupling, which means that your brain is able to behave as if this activity is happening to you. And your neural connections then are as if this is your experience. And because you're living it, you can pull in your experiences and your thoughts and your questions, and you can transform that story to yours. And it becomes your living embodiment of this story. And then also think how much deeper we can take that information then if we're engaging it in that full way. And you mentioned didactic, right? Here's the difference is, I could spew facts at you about the Missoula floods, and you might remember something or that it was big, some amount of big. But if you're living it, if it becomes your own experience, the capacity for deepening in that information, for remembering that information is so much bigger.
Absolutely. I think there's only one thing that I would add, and that's, and it was very hard for me to believe it at first. And that is that the brain can't tell the difference between a story and reality. Because if you're engaged in the story, the brain thinks this is reality. Oh, gosh. Well, it leads me into the next question that I wanted to ask, and you may have already answered it, which is, what feels different when you show up with a story?
So when I think I have a lot of privilege when I go into a space as an educator that a classroom teacher doesn't have. One of the pieces that I have, I guess, some of the planning information that I've learned how to prepare for a group of people is to plan 50% of my activities, leaving the other 50% completely open to the moment and to flexibility. And that it's okay if I don't get to that 50%. A classroom teacher can't do that. They have to have these very specific curriculum that they are following and these very specific standards that they are meeting, and they have to prove that every word that comes out of their mouth ties to this standard. Yeah. I can come in and I can catch their stories, and if they have so much to tell me, because kids have so many stories to share, that it means I have to cut out an entire story I plan to share, that's okay. We've learned so much by exchanging that information, by asking them to tell me what they know about the topic, that I'm giving them all those benefits that the teacher was hoping I would bring. I can also switch, right? I can switch what I'm bringing in because I have that flexibility. If I come in and someone asks for a story, or I see, oh, you have posters on your wall about grasshoppers, I can switch and I can share a story about grasshoppers. And I can take that time to deepen those relationships, as you talked about earlier. I think all good teachers are building those relationships, but it's also true that they just don't have the amount of time to do that I can in my work.
Yeah. You also have the opportunity to bring students outside into the outdoors. I wanted you to talk about that, because that relates very much to your concept of story creating a reality for them. And what you're doing is you're stepping them into the reality that you want to teach them about. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
What's available outside that's not available inside?
I feel, when I am outside, I feel grounded. I feel calmer. I feel more focused. I feel connected. And I can feel that in my body, and I know that it is good. Mm-hmm. But all the research and literature backs that up too, that when we spend more time in nature, we are able to focus better in the classroom. We are able to regulate our bodies better. One of the pieces of that that's so very important to me is what's called the echogenic effect. So the echogenic effect is this equalizing principle of nature. So when we take people who are disadvantaged outside, or when they go to a park, or whomever is, when you look at all those statistics about schools and you see that people who are economically disadvantaged are struggling in so many different aspects of schooling on the whole. Of course, this is a statistic. This is not an individual thing, right? Those benefits of being in nature are disproportionately advantageous to people who are disproportionately impacted by the economics of our society. So when we go outside, everyone benefits, but the kids or the adults who are already economically disadvantaged are more advantaged in nature, and it literally brings us up. It's equigenic. It equalizes us into a more level playing field, which I think that's amazing. I also want to go back to that idea of planning and how we structure our days and that flexibility. So I'm thinking back to the group that I get to see every week. We start in September. It's a school year program, and must have been our second or third week. My co-mentor and I planned our day. We said, okay, well, we're gonna, after we all come together and have our circle and settle in, let's go down to the pond. I bet there's some tracks. We're going to do some tracking. After we find the tracks at the pond, we'll go through the prairie. We'll look for more tracks. We'll see what insects we can identify. We'll see what plants we can identify, or what, we'll just see what we can find for animal sign in the prairie. We had this whole day of tracking planned out.
Yeah.
We got to the pond, and there's a small stretch of mud. It's probably only 2 feet by 4 or 5 feet before you get into the water. And we're looking at the tracks with the kids, and then somebody steps in the mud. And then they step further into the mud. And then they poke the mud. Pretty soon someone else is in there, and they're squishing in the mud. We didn't leave that space. We spent 3 hours in this tiny little mud pit. By the end of the day, we had kids who were completely covered head to toe in mud. I remember one of them went to change and said they went off on their own to change in the woods and came back and said, all I'm wearing is my rain suit. They had taken all of the muddy clothes off, and all that was left was the rain suit.
What is the
flexibility. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I love the fact that you responded to that. That's I can tell you as a teacher, to lose control of your students, which at the moment you did, but you obviously managed it well. But what did the students feel they had learned? Did they express that to you at all?
So this event has come up over and over since then. So this is their story now that they get to tell and that they are reflecting back to us. It's a positive experience that they have had. It's building their desire to go back outside again. Right? Yes, I hear that in your voice, right? I said earlier, my biggest goals are curiosity, empathy, and connection. And that's because when we have those things, we become learners. I can spout facts at people all day long, but if they're not curious and connected, they're not going to care. They're not going to want to learn. Learning becomes a chore. When they go outside and they are connected and curious, now they're asking the questions. Well, can we go back to the mud? Whose tracks are those? How come it's squishier over here and less squishy over there? How come he got stuck but I didn't? Right? You get to work with their own natural desire to learn.
Oh, I love that, because I've often said to students, if they can ask me any question, I said, because when you ask a question, it is a learning moment for you. You've said, oh, here's something that I don't know. And I can then didactically give them the answer, but it's no longer didactic in the pure sense, because in fact they've already opened the gate because they want it. Yeah, I
Yes.
love it. I love
And
it.
so often I don't go back to the didactic answer if I can, right?
Yeah, yeah,
You ask me whose track that is. Well, what do you notice about
yeah,
that track?
yeah,
How many toes does that animal have?
yeah,
How
yeah.
big do you think an animal would need to be to make that size track? Right? And I can leave them with those mysteries and that curiosity.
As
And then
well.
they can go home. The ability to access books and the internet and information is so enormous right now. We have endless access to knowledge. And if we have curiosity to match that, then we're gaining real learning and real understanding.
Oh, you've just said something most profound. I'm sure you know that, but I'm going to clarify it. The fact that we live today with access to more information at our fingertips than ever before means that that's that's not where the focus should be in training or in education, because that's always there for you. The key is exactly as you've said: spark the curiosity so that they would then ask the question, and then it becomes a reason for them to go get that information, and then that makes meaning to them as they get it. Very
So this
profound.
is a little of a side tangent, only because it's not connected to storytelling or nature directly. But right now in elementary schools, and probably higher, but my kids are elementary and just entering middle school,
Mm-hmm.
they're teaching math in a way that many people my age find very difficult and very frustrating. But what they're doing is helping kids to learn number sense and to learn how to understand the math. There's much less of this rule first and this rule next. It's like, how do you figure out how to the addition? How is this working in your mind? Show me your thought process. And
Ah,
I think that's brilliant. I think it's so important because, as you said, I can type into Google if I have a math question and I want to know the answer. I don't even have to think about it, and it'll pop out my answer. But if it pops out an answer that's nonsense and I have no number sense, I won't know that. Right?
yes,
So, yeah. So, a little
beautiful.
tangent there.
Oh no, no, it's an important tangent. It, it reminds me of my grandson who hated math. He just I shouldn't say that in the yes, I will say it in the past tense, because he was then, after he got through school, he was learning how to run a crane, big construction crane. And he said, Grandma, he says, now I understand what the math was about, because he could see the application of it to something, and it had suddenly had meaning for him. So and then the numbers had meaning to him. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. Well, to take us back to story, then, with my own child and my learning about social studies,
Mm-hmm.
what is social studies and his story other than story? But that's not how I learned it. And my knowledge of history is tiny. My kid, however, is in a history class with a remarkable teacher who is goofy and silly and playful, and he tells stories all day long. So my kid comes home and is telling me stories about ancient Greece and ancient Egypt, and some of them are totally dialed into middle school boy mind, right? But he's absorbing this information and he loves it, and he's learning our history in ways I never did.
Fabulous. Power of story, no question. Well, now, let me ask you this. How do you choose which story to tell?
If I am being hired to come into a classroom or a library or a community event, there's usually a theme. So I start with the theme, and then I also pull in whatever is seasonal. So even if it's the same theme in winter and summer, I'm not going to tell the same stories, because to me, ignoring the season is not possible. The season is part of the theme for me always. And then I'm looking at how much time do I have? How old is my audience? I have programs for 3 years all the way to elders. And then I start to look at, okay, well, here's all the possibilities. Now, what is the feel of each of these stories? I use a system of mapping and identifying the feel of stories that connects to, this won't surprise you, nature. So I'm looking at, okay, well, in the East, that's our morning, that's our springtime, that's the time of welcoming and engaging. Which stories feel like they're in that East time? And that's the beginning. And then I'm looking at, okay, the Southeast, that's our time of activation. This might be the stories with a lot of participation, maybe singing songs with me, or hand movements, or suggesting the birds to be in the story. And I've tried to put that first. I thought, these are kids, they need to move. I tried to put that before the welcoming and the engaging, and it doesn't work. They aren't ready. They don't trust me. They don't know me. They just stare at me. So I have to go. I have to go east, southeast, and then the south. Now we're ready for this focus, this hard work, the longer stories. And then we move into the southwest. We need a break. For kids, a break is a silly, easy, light story. Then we're going to move into the west. We're starting to come into that dinner time where we're collecting our stories, where we're reflecting our day. This is our community building stories. And then we move in towards our northwest. This is our reflection period, the stories that make you go, oh, yes, that's how it's supposed to be. And that's usually where we leave it. Moving into the north is that integration. This is the thing that, as I'm asking kids to reflect back to me, they're integrating. When they go home and they share their stories, they're integrating. And then we complete our cycle into the northeast with our goodbyes and our thank yous and see you agains. And we've completed that whole natural cycle.
I like that. It's a story arc in itself.
This is how I plan all of my events now, as well as looking at my year. So it was interesting. Oh, I hope I can remember some of what you said in the introduction about, you said things that made me think about how this is a reflective time of year, talking about how do we get to where we are and who we are? How do we know that? How do we change that? And so this time of year in the winter, this is that north part of the year where we're really reflective. It's dark, it's cold, we're inside, at least in the northern hemisphere. Yeah. And so I'm going through a process I try to do every winter of looking through multiple steps of who am I? How did I get here? Where am I going? Where do I want to be going? Because this is the time of year for that. And then in spring, we make it happen. We're energized. We're ready to go.
I'm going to break the flow for just a moment because there's one story that came to my mind as you were talking, and I just can't resist telling it. You mentioned bringing the birds into the story. I was interviewing someone in London, of all places. Now, London is a big city, right? Very big city. And I'm interviewing a man who is a former opera singer who now spends his time teaching people to find their voice. Very important thing. If you're a singer or an actor or a speaker or just anybody, to find your voice is very important because it has more meaning than just the physical voice. It's what is you're going to say. Now, here's the amazing thing. I listened to the tape afterwards, and the tape was filled with birdsong. And I thought, how could that happen in a city where we heard the trucks going by, and then it was filled with birdsong? So has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it's the story that comes to my mind because I've never forgotten it. And he was surprised himself when he learned of it.
That's one of my biggest curiosities. I can hear birds that are so far away. And I imagine if my kids were that far away and I could hear them, they would have to be so loud. To be next to them would be so painful. But to be next to a bird that I can still hear from that distance is not that loud, is not that painful. What is the magic of birds that we can hear them near or far and enjoy them near or far? If you have any audiologists out there that can answer this question, I would love to know.
Well, actually, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of some of the birds in my yard who are really annoying when they are close by. I go out and I tell them, enough, enough. Yeah, well, anyway. All right. You know, I began by talking about the fact that this is, you've taken an unusual, unconventional path for teaching. And I'm curious, what continues to show you that you do bring value to the work? Talk about that, because I'm always curious as to what keeps people motivated to do what they do.
Yeah, and I remember when we met talking about how I struggle with that. When we were in that story workshop together, how sometimes I enjoy my work so much that I feel like it can't have value. I remember in this reflection process last year, I remember writing that down and writing down something along the lines of like, if it has value, I have to be suffering. And then thinking, whoa, is that true? Do I believe that? And so I've done a lot of reflecting on that this year. And many of the things that remind me of the value of my work are the stories, like what we've been talking about, of the way that my work gets reflected back to me. So the very first time that I had a program that was all my own, a storyteller and librarian friend had hired me for a program for 1,000 Books Before Kindergarten celebration. So these are kids who are being encouraged to read or have their parents read to them 1,000 books before kindergarten. It's a huge marker of literacy when you're entering kindergarten, and like word knowledge and book knowledge and letter sense. So I was there for this celebration to tell stories. I had the whole set was mine. I had never built a set before. One of the kids there was a colleague of mine's 4-year-old. She emailed me a few days later to tell me the story that happened after my program. One of the stories I told was the story, I call it Grandmother Oak. This is the story of why oak trees keep their leaves in winter. And in short, a young weasel is told that when the leaves are gone from the trees, they have to stay inside for winter. And the oak tree holds onto her leaves so the weasel can continue to play outside all winter long. So this 4-year-old and her mom go to the park, and she notices an oak tree, and that the oak tree has leaves on it. She's asking Mom, that tree still has leaves on it, even though they're brown and crinkly. Is that an oak tree? She has awareness she's never had before. She has curiosity she's never had before. And Mom says yes, and she says, well, do oak trees really keep their leaves in winter so we can play outside? And this is where I'm so proud of Mom, because Mom doesn't give this didactic response, right? Mom says, well, why don't you ask the oak tree? So this 4-year-old approaches the oak tree, and the wind blows. And you can tell me why the wind blows, or you can imagine for yourself, why. Was this just coincidence? Was this a synchronicity? But the wind blew, and all those brown, crinkly leaves rattled against each other. And the 4-year-old's eyes were huge with wonder. She had just talked to an oak tree. She walked away from that experience full of wonder and curiosity and awe, full of a desire to go out into nature, to learn more, full of the sense that she had connected with that tree and that was a power she held. That's a powerful story for me.
Well, you brought tears to my eyes. Oh, gosh.
I also think about, do you know Elizabeth Ellis?
Yes, I do.
Elizabeth Ellis, for your listeners, is a storyteller. She's an elder. She was the keynote speaker at the National Storytelling Conference in 2020. Now, if you remember, 2020 was a rough year. This was pandemic year, the first year of the pandemic, the hardest year of the pandemic. So our conference was online. And it was also the first year of Trump's presidency. So between that and the pandemic, many of us were feeling this confusion, this fear, this lack of knowing what to do and how to do it. There were feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. And many of us were just trying to figure out, how do we help people feel like we're going to be okay? So Elizabeth Ellis gets on to this Zoom conference as the keynote speaker. I'm sitting in my back porch wrapped in blankets, trying to pretend like I'm at a conference instead of hearing my children yelling. And she talks about storytelling and the need for imagination, how deep imagination, how much we cultivate imagination with storytelling. And we all know this, yeah. And then she goes into imagination is the root of problem solving and empathy. I thought about that. To problem solve, you first have to imagine that there could be a better way. You have to have enough imagination to think something about this process, about this life, about whatever it is could be better. I can see a better way. And then you have to have enough imagination to say, well, maybe if we try this instead, we'll get to that better way. And to empathize, you also have to have imagination. In order to empathize, one must be able to imagine how someone else is feeling, imagine how they would feel in that position. They have to imagine a different life. And when I think about those two things, really, what could be more important than developing our capacity for empathy and problem solving? With more empathy and a greater capacity for problem solving, I truly think we could fix the world. And I'm not saying storytelling is going to do that alone, right? But that need for imagination is so great. When I struggle to remember my value, I go back to that. I am helping us learn to be empathetic, to be problem solvers. I'm helping us connect to the world around us. I'm helping us connect to each other and to ourselves. And that might not be solving any world problems, but it's increasing the capacity of everyone around me to solve the world's problems.
I love the fact that you see it as increasing capacity, because in the end, it's only people who will solve this problem. Mm-hmm. So if they don't have a capacity, they can't do it. Mm-hmm. There's no other magic. It's got to come from us.
Yep.
Is there a question today that you would have liked? Excuse me. See, I really did get tears in my eyes. Still clearing. Is there a question you would like to answer that I haven't asked you yet?
You know, a lot of times people hear me tell stories and they say something like, "Wow, you're such a great storyteller. I could never do that." And I guess that's not a question, but my response to that is, we are all storytellers. This is what it is to be human. You're a storyteller who is a professional storyteller. You've been doing this for years. But when we meet and I say, "Oh, I like your jacket," and you tell me, "Oh, that came from my sister. Oh, I got that at the thrift store for $3. You're telling me your story. When I greet my kids when they get off the bus and I ask them what they did at recess, they're telling me their story. This is what it is to be human. This is how we have grown to be interconnected. So don't doubt your ability as a storyteller. You are already a storyteller.
Carl, this has been an incredible conversation. Do you have any final words for our audience?
I think I'd like to remind us all that there is a reason that storytelling and nature connection feel so good in our bodies. We evolved with nature. We are a part of nature, not connected from, or not separate from it. We are a part of nature. We need nature and nature needs us. It goes both ways. So when we are out in nature, it should feel right in our bodies. It is right in our bodies. Similarly, we as humans evolved as storytellers. This is how we grew our community and shared our knowledge. For thousands and thousands of years, we have been telling stories. So if this conversation has resonated with you, if it feels right in your body to hear stories and to be outside, I encourage you and me and all of us to spend more time outside with nature and catching each other's stories.
Okay, so there. Well, let me tell you, let me tell the audience rather, if you are intrigued with Carl's ideas about storytelling and how she does it, there are some things that she's going to be doing. She does something called For Women Telling. Interesting title. I think you understand what it means. It's going to be online, and there'll be some information about that from her on her website, which I'll give you in just a moment. She also says for those people who are in the Madison area, she does something for families called Winter Celebration, and she'll be doing something with, excuse me, with adults. It's a fundraiser for immigrant support, but it's all in Madison. Again, information is coming on her website, coralconantgilles.com. And you've got that even on the screen there, easy to read. Well, Carl, I have so enjoyed this conversation, and not everybody brings me to tears, but you did today. And I want to thank you for your true earnestness in what you do.
It's been such a pleasure to be here, Madelyn. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to your audience for showing up today and being a viewer.
Every now and then, there is something that changes how I think about the world. Grounds for Thought is a place where I talk about these moments so that you can explore the meaning for yourself.
We often talk about learning as if it were something we pass along, something that we give or we receive or we store or we transfer. Knowledge is seen as an object, skills as assets, understanding is something that can be delivered. But Humberto Maturana offered us a very different way of seeing. Maturana's work invites us to see learning not as the transfer of detachable skills or knowledge, but as a self-formative relational process, one that is embodied, situated, and shaped through lived experience. Remember the carpenter. Remember the kids in the mud. In this view, knowing is not something we acquire and carry away. It's something we become through relationship, context, and practice. Just like the carpenter, we become a carpenter. In his view, learning is not something that moves from one person to another. It is something that happens within us through relationship, through reading, listening, and in conversation, using our hands to make things and observing the world we live in. We do not absorb knowledge. We actually reorganize ourselves in response to experience. Learning in this sense is not additive, it is transformative. I've often talked about learning happening when the student can integrate the new content with what they already know. Only then does it become knowledge. What struck me in my conversation with Carl let me say that differently. What struck me in my conversation with Coral was how fully her work embodies this idea without ever needing to name it. She doesn't teach children about nature. She creates the conditions for relationship with place, with story, and with one another. And in those conditions, something shifts. Attention deepens. Imagination awakens. Curiosity leads to care. Maturana would say that knowing arises in living systems through interaction, that cognition is not separate from emotion, body, or environment. We learn not by being told, but by being in relation. That may be why storytelling works the way it does. When we listen to a story, our bodies respond, our memories surface, our imaginations fill in what is not said. Each of us takes what we need, even as we share a collective experience. Nothing is transferred. Remember, if I tell you the story, I still have the story as well as you. Yet something is profoundly learned. This kind of learning resists standardization. It cannot be reduced to outcomes or measured neatly, and perhaps that is why we sometimes struggle to trust it. If learning looks like joy, if it feels natural, if it comes alive through ease rather than effort, we may wonder whether it counts. Maturana reminds us that if life itself is not efficient, it is relational, and so is learning. Perhaps the question is not whether these ways of learning are legitimate. Perhaps the question is whether we have been looking in the wrong place for legitimacy all along. So here's my grounds for thought. Where in your life are you reorganizing yourself through relationship rather than instruction? And what kind of learning might be waiting there if you allowed it to count? If you're a leader, change the question slightly. When have you created the environment for your team that enhanced the relationship the members of the team can have a deeper relationship with each other and with the mission? If these questions intrigue you, I'll be talking with Rolla Lewis next week when he and I will talk about learning through unexpected places. I hope you will join me. I want to thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation and learned something new. And of course, if you're on YouTube, please click the like button and subscribe. It means a great deal to me, and also to those people who are trying to find this kind of information. I'm Madelyn Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilient leader.